What's going on, Husker Nation? Welcome back into another episode. Nebraska had a monster recruiting weekend last weekend. They had tons of visitors from the class of 2026, 2027, and even a few from the class of 2028. But first, if you haven't done so yet, make sure you like the video, share around, comment your thoughts down below as we progress throughout the video. And as well, if you haven't done so yet, become a member. We have exclusive content coming to members soon. But for now, let's dive into the class of 2026 recruits and where Nebraska sits with those. That's really what we're going to focus on. I'll have this list, and actually I'll pull it up right now. So I've got it organized for you by date and which class they're in. The big thing here I want to focus on is 2026. Class of 2027 is a ways away, with the exception of Trey Taylor, and 2028 is many years away. So we're really honing in on the 2026 recruits, where they sit with Nebraska, or where Nebraska really sits with them. So on the far left side, you see on March 14th, Nebraska had offensive tackle Colin Campbell in for an unofficial visit. Now, Nebraska's been on Colin for quite a while. The big thing with Colin is his recruitment kind of slowly started to build, and then it really started to kind of take off here in the last month or so. But I'd say if you had to ask me today who's his favorites, it'd probably be Nebraska, and it'd probably be Kansas State. Nebraska goes on him very early, and they've been recruiting him heavily the entire time. They were one of his first offers originally. And then here in the middle of your screen, we're going to go right from the top all the way down. Nebraska had interior offensive lineman Ryan Moret in from Miami, Florida. Now, Nebraska likes him as a center. He can play left or right guard. He will probably more than likely, wherever he goes, play all three interior positions, just at least in practice. But Nebraska likes him as a center. They're battling his home state school, Miami. They're battling Ole Miss, and that's really the only other two schools I think that are in big contention for his services, along with Nebraska. Now, Ryan is going to be really tough to pull away from Miami, but if he does leave the state between Nebraska and Ole Miss, I think Nebraska would have a better shot to pull him away from the home school, the Miami Hurricanes. Nebraska is in a really good spot with his recruitment. Once he comes in for his unofficial, that's when things really start to heat up. They roll out the red carpet treatment. They do all that fun stuff that you do on official visits. Nebraska also had another offensive lineman, another interior offensive lineman. Jax Turner was in town. Now, he is higher on Nebraska's board than some people might think. And we haven't honestly talked a lot about Jax Turner on this page, unfortunately. But I wanted to make sure we address his recruitment a little bit. Now, when you pull up his recruiting page, you're going to see, well, he's just like a mid to high 3-star. Well, don't really worry too much about that. Look at his offer list. His offer list is absolutely insane. He has a tremendous offer list. In fact, I'd say, based on kind of how his recruitment is sitting right now, Nebraska is probably top 3, top 4 right now, but we're battling Oregon and we're battling Michigan. I would say those are his two favorites right now, would be Oregon and Michigan. And I would say he's probably an Oregon lean at this point in time. Nebraska was on Jax very early, though, in his recruitment. Again, one of these guys that Nebraska offered early. Other teams kind of take notice, and then their recruitment just goes entirely through the roof. Nebraska is in a really good spot right now with Jax Turner, though. It's just going to be an NIL battle between Oregon, Michigan, and Nebraska. And right now, Nebraska's NIL is not quite what it is with Oregon or Michigan. Nebraska had a defensive back also come in. Now, this guy we haven't talked about a ton, but he is a big-time recruit. He's a consensus 4-star. He's like a top 170 player, I believe, on all major services. Talking about Cameron Hamil. Offers from everybody in the country. He's from Arizona. Arizona State is one of his favorites. He might be staying home, but the way his recruitment is kind of, if you look at like all the other schools in his top group, that's why I say he might stay home, because he's got schools from all over the country in his top group. Penn State, Tennessee, Oregon, Ohio State, and Nebraska. So you got schools that are not necessarily close to home, except for Oregon's not too far from Arizona. So I think he is willing to leave home. It's just going to be how How far does he want to go? Is Nebraska too far? Maybe, maybe not. We're not sure. The big thing, though, we got him here for an unofficial visit. Getting guys from out of state, especially as far as Arizona, to come on their own dime for an unofficial visit is very, very important. And it's always a very good sign of where you sit in that player's recruitment. The big thing now that you have to watch for, now he's done his unofficial to Nebraska. He's going to take unofficials elsewhere. Does he set up an official visit with Nebraska in the summer? If you get that official visit, like we just said a little bit ago, it is huge. That is where everything can change. Nebraska's number one defensive lineman, well, number one and /1B, Valdon Sohn and Titan Davis both made their way to Nebraska this past weekend. Now, Sohn has everybody in the nation after him. He's probably, if not the best, one of the best interior defensive lineman prospects in the entire 2026 class. He's a consensus top 100 player. He's a top 20 player on one service at on three, I believe. And Nebraska right now is probably, if you're asking me, 1A, 1B in terms of his overall recruitment. The biggest competition is going to be Florida and Oklahoma as things sit right now. He's got offers from everybody, though. Things can change, especially when you have a recruit that's this big time of a recruit. Nebraska's sales pitch to Sohn really has been this: Ndamukong Suh 2.0. That's the recruiting pitch. And how could you not love that recruiting pitch? A former number 2 overall pick in the NFL, probably an NFL Hall of Famer, and certainly a college football Hall of Famer, one of the greatest to ever do it. That's a hell of a pitch that you can have to say, we see you being him. And ironically, that person, Ndamukong Suh, played at Nebraska. Why not come do it again for us? Nebraska has a legit chance here to land one of the top defensive linemen in America. Titan Davis is another one of those top defensive linemen in America. Here's the thing with Titan. Nebraska was recruiting him heavily, really since like his sophomore season. And that was with Tony White and Terrence Knighton as the main recruiters. Well, then both of them left, and Nebraska never stopped recruiting him. The big thing is because they have Keith Williams on staff, who is a St. Louis native who played at Nebraska. He is how Nebraska, Keith Williams, has gotten their foot back in the door in St. Louis. It's not a far drive from Lincoln. A lot of the St. Louis kids typically go to the SEC. Missouri does not do a great job recruiting in-state talent, even though they have a huge NIL war chest and they can start paying them NIL when they're in high school. Missouri is not really a threat here to me for Titan Davis. They could be down the line. I think the big thing with Titan, his top group is going to be Oklahoma, Michigan, Alabama, and Nebraska. And I think come signing day, come December of 2025, I think Titan Davis is probably going to sign with Nebraska. I think Nebraska is in a very good spot. And that's evident because after his visit, he immediately set up his official visit for June 13th, I believe it was. I have it on the sheet, but I'm not going to scroll right now, which is a huge sign. Wide receiver Nasir Rankin was also in town. I personally, well, let me backtrack real quick. Wide receiver Nasir Rankin is a top-level Power 4 prospect in both football and basketball. And he wants to play both in college. Here's the thing, though. I think it's a lot harder to play basketball in college and football than it is to say baseball and football. The sports kind of overlap a little bit. Now, if let's say he's playing both in college and Nebraska has a bowl game, say in January or late December, like they did this past year, and he has a conflicting basketball game, does he go play basketball or does he go play football? Or, basketball season starts in November. Does he choose to play football instead of early season basketball, or does he choose to play early season basketball instead of football? I don't think you can do both. I think it's one or the other. And I think that's why Nebraska probably doesn't land Nasir Rankin as a commitment. I think Illinois is probably his favorite. They've offered him in both sports. That is a program that would be willing to work with him a little bit because Illinois has kind of always been the 6, 7, 8 win team. Now they've really started to kind of get back into gear with their new head coach the last 2 years. I just totally drew a blank on his name. Oh, Brett Bielema. Yeah, they've started to kind of get back in that 8, 9, 10 win category with Brett Bielema. But I still think that's a player they're willing to take that chance on. I think Nebraska is willing to get him here and say, look, you're playing football. I think that's the way it would go. And then our last 2026 unofficial visitor, I should say, would be running back Jamal Rule. Now, I think Nebraska is probably 1 or 1B with Rule. I really think his top 3 is NC State, Nebraska, and Wisconsin. Right now, at least. That could change. He's taking a ton of other unofficials, but right now he's only set up 3 official visits for the summer, and it's those 3 schools that we just mentioned, NC State, Wisconsin, and Nebraska. Nebraska also has Stephen Walker, who hasn't come in for an unofficial yet, on their board at running back, and he would be like 1A, and Rule would be 1B. If Rule called Nebraska and said, hey, I'm ready to commit, let's lock this in, Coach Rule's taking his commitment, no question about it. But does Nebraska take 2 running backs? And are those 2 potentially Jamal Rule and Stephen Walker? Maybe. I think Nebraska is in a really good spot with Rule. I truly believe Nebraska is leading the way right now for Rule. But if they take two running backs, maybe, one of your higher on the board aren't likely. Maybe Stephen Walker just says, hey, you know what? I want to be the guy in your class at running back. So that's entirely possible, but we're not entirely sure either. The one 2027 recruit we're going to talk a little bit about is Trey Taylor. We've talked about him plenty. He's probably going to be a 5-star recruit by the time things settle, unless the recruiting services don't do an update for a while. But I think they're going to be doing one probably in the summer sometime. But On3 has Trey Taylor as a 4-star. I think Rivals has him as like the 20th overall, no, the 11th overall player, I believe, in the entire class. He will be a damn near 5-star, consensus 5-star. His recruitment is really interesting. He has a top 5. Now, his top 5 is kind of fluid, though. So it's Nebraska, it's Michigan, it's his home state school, Illinois, Texas A&M, and I believe LSU was his other for his top 5. But he visited Auburn as well, just like last weekend. So I'm not entirely sure if maybe Auburn is making a move and maybe another team falls out. Regardless, I think Nebraska is probably the favorite right now, which is absolutely insane. Trey loves Nebraska. His visit was almost a week ago, and he is still constantly posting about Nebraska and their fans and how much he loved Nebraska. I think Nebraska has a legit chance to land Trey Taylor come June 6th of this year when he announces his commitment. And it's going to be a huge commitment because he's not going to only help recruit the class of 2026, but the class of 2027 and potentially some guys in 2028 as well. That's all I've got for your recruiting update today. We'll have another one once we confirm more visitors for this upcoming weekend. Make sure you like, comment, subscribe, become a member real quick. Want to thank our members. If you see it scrolling there on the bottom, 2 months, 3 months, and 4 months. So we have exclusive membership content coming out here in the coming weeks, maybe another month or so. But make sure you become a member for exclusive content. Have a great weekend, everybody.